I never imagined that a simple backyard cookout would change the entire course of my life. It's strange to think how the smallest moments, a friend's invitation, a song on the radio, can crack open a door you didn't even know was there. Looking back now, it's almost funny how easily you can mistake charm for kindness, or how the first day of something can feel like any other. It was a soft, golden evening in late June, the kind that makes the city of Portland feel like it's finally exhaling after a long, gray winter. Eric Tran, my oldest friend and perpetual social director, had texted me at least 6 times to make sure I was coming. "You need to get out, man," he said, practically dragging me by the sleeve. "Trust me, it's just people, food, and music. You remember what fun is, right?" Truth be told, I hadn't been feeling very social. My mother had passed away a year ago that spring, and I'd let the world grow smaller and quieter around me. There were days when the silence in my apartment pressed in so close, I thought I might disappear altogether. But something about the summer, the promise of light, maybe, or just Eric's stubbornness, got me off my couch and out the door. Eric's house was just across Alberta Park, a low-slung craftsman with an unruly backyard and a half-finished treehouse that had never seen a single child. He'd strung up Christmas lights and set out mismatched lawn chairs, filling the air with indie rock and the smoky aroma of grilled corn and bratwurst. A couple of his neighbors leaned over the fence to chat, and there were more people than I expected, faces from work, friends of friends, a few young couples balancing paper plates and craft beers. I hovered at the edge, nursing a ginger ale, trying to look busy with my phone. Eric, always playing host, introduced me around but didn't hover, which I appreciated. The comfort of fading into the background is underrated, especially when you're still learning how to breathe again after loss. Then I heard her laugh. Not the polite chuckle of someone being polite at a party, but the kind of laugh that makes you wonder what joke you missed. Madison Clark was leaning against the picnic table, arguing with someone about which band belonged on the Ultimate Grill playlist. She was quick-witted, firing back with a line about how you can't trust anyone who dismisses Hall and Oates at a barbecue. I must have smiled, because Eric caught me watching and nudged me forward. "You'll like her," he whispered. "Just don't mention your secret affection for Dad Rock." Madison's eyes caught mine, bright and curious, and for a moment, I forgot how heavy the world felt. She waved me over. "Settle this for us, Ethan, are you a purist, or do you believe in mixing genres at a cookout?" I shrugged, feigning deep consideration. "I think a good playlist should surprise you. Keep people guessing." She grinned. "See? That's the spirit. If you're too predictable, you end up like my dad, same classic rock, every single summer." Someone called for more ice, and the debate drifted away, leaving the two of us in an easy silence. Madison sipped her lemonade, watching a group of kids chase a soccer ball in the neighbor's yard. "Eric says you're the responsible one," she teased. "But you don't look like a guy who skips dessert." "Only on principle," I said, smiling. "Life's too short to say no to pie." It was the kind of thing my mother used to say, and for a split second I felt her close by, like sunlight on my shoulder. We wandered to the edge of the yard, the music softer there, the light growing warmer as the sun dipped behind the maples. Madison told me about growing up in Portland, about her parents' big personalities, her brother's tendency to disappear during family dinners. I shared a story about childhood summers at the coast, and somewhere in the telling, my mother's name slipped out. Madison didn't flinch or change the subject, just nodded quietly, her gaze softening. "My parents can be a lot," she admitted, rolling her eyes but smiling. "They mean well. Mostly. Sometimes I wish they'd just let things be. But that's family, right?" I nodded, thinking of the way my mom always knew when to step in, and when to step back. I reached into my wallet out of habit, brushing my thumb over the tiny photo of her I kept there. The ache never really left, but that night, with the music and Madison's laughter and the scent of grass and grilled onions in the air, it felt a little less sharp. As twilight fell, the crowd thinned. Someone started passing around sparklers, and Eric was already in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Madison and I lingered by the fence, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "I should probably go," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But this was fun. You're easy to talk to." I smiled. "Let's do it again. Maybe I'll let you pick the playlist." She handed me her number, scrawled on the back of a receipt. "Next time, you bring dessert. And no skipping the Hall and Oates." Walking home, the air felt lighter, sweeter somehow. I checked my phone as I crossed the park. There was a text from Madison already waiting. "Next time, I'm picking the playlist." I laughed, shaking my head. For the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me, a flicker of hope, maybe, or just the thrill of possibility. Sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected night to remind you that life can begin again, even when you least expect it. As I slipped my mother's picture back into my wallet, I wondered if Madison's warmth was just a spark, or the start of something real. Either way, I was ready to find out. "You'll love them," Madison promised as she double-checked the ribbon on my berry pie. "Just, don't let Dad start talking about local politics." She tried to sound casual, but I caught the flicker of nerves in her smile. Driving up into West Hills that crisp September evening, I felt like I was crossing some invisible border. Portland's downtown faded behind us, giving way to winding streets lined with maples, mansions, and sweeping views of the skyline. Madison squeezed my hand as we pulled into her parents' long driveway, her thumb circling my knuckle, a subtle signal, like she was bracing for something, too. Inside, the Clark home was spotless and modern, all polished wood and white walls, with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city's patchwork lights. Jazz music drifted from hidden speakers, and the smell of rosemary chicken filled the air. On the kitchen island, an artful display of salads, roasted vegetables, and rolls looked ready for a magazine spread. Linda Clark glided over to greet us, crisp in a blue blouse and pearl earrings. "Oh, you must be Ethan. How thoughtful, homemade pie, that's adorable," she cooed, holding the dish up for inspection as if it might win a prize at the fair. Her smile was perfect, but her eyes darted to a side table stacked with desserts from the city's best bakery. "Mom, don't embarrass him," Madison said, but her voice was light, like she'd said this before. Robert Clark appeared with a drink in hand, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence filling the room before he even spoke. "So, you're the famous Ethan," he said, clapping me on the back with just enough force to make me grip the pie tighter. "Glad you could join us. Hope you're hungry, Linda's gone all out." I offered my pie, and Linda set it among the other desserts with a polite, "We'll have to try this later." Robert ushered us into the living room, where a wall of family photos stretched from floor to ceiling, ski trips in Aspen, Madison's piano recitals, Ryan's college graduation, each moment frozen behind gleaming glass. There was an order to everything, but the warmth you'd expect was missing, a museum more than a home. We settled around the table, sunlight streaming through the windows, glinting off the cut crystal. Robert started right in, steering the conversation from city politics, "This mayor has no clue about traffic control," to the Ducks' chances at the championship. He tossed out opinions like fastballs, daring anyone to catch them. I tried to keep up, nodding at the right moments, but I felt the ground shifting beneath me. Madison's laughter was a beat too quick, her glances at her dad both fond and watchful. When Ryan Clark showed up late, slinging his jacket over a chair, he winked at me and stage whispered, don't worry, man, I always try to escape before dessert. Linda shot him a look sharp enough to slice the roast chicken. Dinner was a blur of flavors: perfectly roasted chicken, potatoes layered with cheese, a kale salad no one touched except Linda, who nibbled dutifully while Robert raved about the mashed potatoes. Madison's hand found my knee under the table when the conversation got too pointed, her thumb tracing gentle circles. "So, Ethan," Robert said, pausing to refill his wine, "what exactly is it you do again?" His tone was breezy, but his eyes didn't blink. "I'm in nonprofit finance," I said. "Mostly working with food security programs." "Nonprofit?" Robert raised an eyebrow, then smiled, wide and empty. "Well, good for you. Someone's got to save the world. What about your folks, where do they live?" Madison shifted in her seat, looking at me. I felt the air grow heavy. "My dad's retired, still here in Portland. My mom, she passed away last year." Linda's fork froze midair, but Robert just nodded, undeterred. "Sorry to hear that. Family's important. What do you see for yourself in 5 years, Ethan? You looking to move up, or is nonprofit a lifelong thing?" It was less a question, more an examination. I took a breath, glancing at Madison, who smiled tightly. "I like making a difference. I'm not in a rush to climb the ladder for its own sake." Robert grunted. "Ambition's not a bad thing. That's how I built our business. But hey, maybe you'll come around." He winked at Madison, who laughed on cue. Ryan, meanwhile, kept things light, making a joke about Clark family interrogations and dodging another of Linda's glares. As dinner wound down, Linda praised the city bakery's cake, passing right over my pie. She asked Madison about her latest work project, hinting at how nice it must be to have something stable. Robert jumped in to share his thoughts on homeownership, taxes, and why renting was throwing money away. I felt myself shrinking, my voice quieter with each round. After dessert, I wandered back to the living room, studying the photos again. It struck me how much space there was between the people in them, how every milestone was perfectly framed but somehow cold. When it was time to go, Robert shook my hand, squeezing hard, and said, "Good luck, son." Linda kissed Madison's cheek and air kissed mine. Madison took my hand, squeezing it as we walked to the door. Outside, under the porch light, she whispered, "Don't worry, they just take time." I forced a smile, trying to believe her. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house glowing behind us, so perfect, so careful. I wondered if I'd just failed some test, or if maybe the real challenge was still to come. Maybe, I thought, this is just what families are: complicated, proud, hard to win over. But as the city lights blurred by my window, I couldn't shake the sense that I was an outsider in a world that looked familiar, but felt nothing like home. We settled into a rhythm: movie nights that stretched long into the dark, rainy walks through Forest Park where we'd lose track of time, and Sunday evenings spent sharing Thai takeout on my battered old couch. For a while, life felt almost effortless, as if the world had given us a pocket of time where nothing too heavy could find us. If only life stayed this simple. Late fall brought an endless drizzle to Portland, a hush against the windows of my little apartment in Alberta Arts. The city turned soft and gray. Inside, though, things felt warm. Madison started leaving little bits of herself behind: a worn toothbrush in my bathroom cup, a mug painted with a cheerful sunflower, her favorite wool socks thrown carelessly into my laundry basket. I found myself smiling at these small invasions, tiny markers that I was slowly becoming we. Our routines bloomed naturally. Madison would slip into my apartment after work, shaking rain from her hair and dropping her coat onto the same kitchen chair. We'd cook together, usually something simple, like roasted veggies and rice, or, on special nights, her family's lasagna recipe. She'd lean over my shoulder as I chopped onions, laughing that I still didn't know the right way to dice. Sometimes, if the mood was right, we'd pour glasses of cheap wine and craft playlists for the perfect rainy night, letting the music fill in the spaces our words left open. One weekend, my neighbor asked if we could watch her old dog, Pepper, while she visited family. Madison took the lead, printing out a feeding schedule and taping it to my fridge. She fussed over Pepper, tucking a blanket around her at night and insisting the dog needed a pillow. Watching Madison sing softly to Pepper, I thought about how my mom would have adored her gentle, practical kindness. It wasn't perfect, of course. Sometimes I'd find my kitchen reorganized, my favorite mug moved, spice jars stacked by color instead of how I remembered. Madison folded my shirts in neat rectangles, tisking my chaotic sock drawer. I'd catch myself laughing, only to wonder why it felt like I was always adjusting, smoothing, shifting to keep the peace. Tracy came by one Friday, her umbrella dripping on the mat as she swept in. She took one look at the sunflower mug and grinned. "So, this is serious?" she teased, winking at me. Madison offered her tea, then dove into rearranging my bookshelf. Tracy watched, her expression sharpening just slightly. After Madison left to walk Pepper, Tracy leaned in, lowering her voice. "You look happy," she said. "But don't shrink, little brother. There's room for two in a relationship, don't disappear just to keep things easy." I shrugged, unsure what to say. Tracy squeezed my shoulder, her eyes softening. "She's great, but you're allowed to take up space, too." Later that night, Madison and I made stir-fry together, chopping and stirring as if we'd done it 100 times. She started singing along to the playlist, her voice a little off-key, but sweet. We laughed, pretending we were on a cooking show, trading jokes about whose kitchen technique was superior. When we sat down to eat, I raised my fork and said, "Just us against the world tonight," and she smiled, eyes shining in the candlelight. Some nights, after dinner, we'd curl up on the couch, Pepper snoring at our feet, and I'd pull out an old photo album. I'd tell Madison stories about my mom, how she'd make pancakes in funny shapes or leave encouraging notes in my lunchbox. Madison would listen for a while, nodding, sometimes squeezing my hand, but inevitably she'd change the subject or offer a quick, comforting line, "She sounds wonderful, Ethan. I wish I'd met her." Then she'd turn the conversation to work, or her brother's latest adventure, and I'd let it go. Still, something in me felt unsettled, like I was holding a piece of myself just out of reach. One rainy Tuesday, the first real crack appeared. I'd come home from work to find the kitchen in perfect order, drawers labeled, spices alphabetized, pans hung with military precision. Madison was wiping down the counter, humming. I stood there, trying to place what felt off. She looked up, noticing my silence. "Just making things a bit easier to find," she said brightly. "You'll thank me next time you need oregano." I tried to laugh it off, but my voice sounded thin. I liked it the way it was. She paused, cloth in hand. "I was only trying to help. I thought it would be nice." We stood in the quiet, the rhythm we'd built stuttering just for a moment. "I appreciate it," I managed, but the words felt stiff, unfamiliar. That night, after Madison left, I found myself pacing the apartment. I picked up my old hoodie, the one my mom had given me, and tugged it over my head, seeking comfort in the soft, worn cotton. I wondered if the space Madison and I shared was growing too small for both of us. When I finally drifted off, the rain still tapping at the windows, I dreamed of my mother. She stood at the edge of the kitchen, smiling gently, her face blurred by distance and memory. I reached out to her, but she faded with the sound of the rain, leaving me with the echo of her warmth and the chill of something unresolved. In the quiet of the early morning, I watched the city lights flicker through rain-soaked glass. The rhythm of us was still there, steady, comforting, but for the first time, I heard something else beneath it, a note of warning that I couldn't quite name. "If you're going to propose, make it count," Eric teased, clapping me on the back so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. "No pressure, man. But if you blow it, she'll never let you live it down." He grinned, leaning back in his favorite cafe chair, already half a latte ahead of me. I laughed, trying to play along, but my hands were sweating. Beneath Eric's good-natured ribbing, something tender pressed against my ribs, a hope so fragile I barely dared to speak it out loud. "How did you know?" I asked, my voice quiet. "With Jamie, I mean. How did you know she was the one?" Eric shrugged. "You just know. Or maybe you decide, and then you keep deciding, every day." He grew serious for a second. "Trust your heart, even if it's scary." "Didn't your mom say something like that?" "She did." My mother's voice sometimes found me when I needed it most, a gentle current running underneath the noise of my doubts. I carried her locket in my jacket pocket everywhere now, rubbing the silver smooth for luck, wishing I could ask her what she'd think of Madison, of all of this. Early spring in Portland brings more rain, but also the first hints of color, 1,000 cherry blossoms turning the air pink and white, petals swirling through the parks like confetti. I chose the Japanese garden for its hush and beauty, not for spectacle but for sincerity. I wanted the memory to be soft-edged, something Madison and I could tuck away for ourselves. The morning of the proposal, I barely slept. I walked the apartment with my mug of coffee, glancing at the ring box on the kitchen table, rehearsing what I might say. I must have checked my jacket pocket a dozen times to make sure my mother's locket was still there. The thought of her, absent but somehow present, steadied me. She would have told me, "You already know the answer." Madison wore her favorite green scarf, hair damp from the drizzle, cheeks pink from the cold. "Why are you smiling like that?" she teased as we wound through the winding garden paths. "Maybe I'm just happy," I said, and for once it was true. I led her to a wooden bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. Around us, couples strolled quietly, the world muted by rain and blossoms. I knelt, heart hammering in my chest. "Madison, I love your kindness, your laughter, even the way you reorganize my kitchen." She laughed, wiping at her eyes before I'd even finished. "I want to make a life with you, messy, imperfect, ours. Will you marry me?" She was already crying, hands trembling as she said yes, yes, a dozen times. The ring box slipped from my palm to hers, and she turned it over thoughtfully, tracing its edges, as if memorizing the moment. Strangers nearby clapped softly. The air felt cleaner, lighter, the rain didn't matter at all. We left the garden arm in arm, half running to the car, laughing as we dodged puddles. Madison wanted to call her parents right away. "They'll be thrilled," she said, still clutching the ring box. I wondered, for a moment, if she'd ever imagined it happening another way. Robert answered the phone on speaker, his voice booming even from 1,000 miles away. "Well done, son. Welcome to the family." I always knew my daughter had good taste. Linda's voice floated in, already turning to details, party themes, guest lists, the color of napkins. "We'll start planning right away, darling. You only get engaged once." It was a blur, Madison's excited phone call, Linda's endless questions, Robert's boisterous approval. By the time we pulled into my driveway, I needed air. "I want to tell someone else, too," I said, quietly. I drove alone to the cemetery, the rings box still in my coat pocket, my mother's locket pressed against my heart. The ground was damp, but a few stubborn daffodils poked through near her headstone. I knelt and placed a single white flower at her grave, slipping a note under the vase. She said, "Yes, Mom. I hope you'd be proud." I sat with her memory a while, letting the rain blur my vision, feeling the ache of absence alongside the thrill of beginning. Sometimes love is the most hopeful risk you can take. That evening, Madison came over with groceries and a playlist of love songs, declaring, "We're making dinner, no takeout tonight." We cooked side by side, turning vegetables and music into laughter, stealing bites from each other's plates. After dinner, we danced barefoot in my kitchen, swaying to old favorites, arms wrapped around each other. The world shrank to just the two of us, and I wondered if happiness could really be this simple. Later, Tracy called. She always seemed to know when I needed her. "So, it's official?" she asked, her tone teasing but warm. "It is," I said, grinning at the ceiling. "I'm happy for you, little brother. Just, don't lose yourself, okay? Be happy, but be you. Promise me that." "I promise." Before bed, I found Madison at the table, still turning the ring box in her hands. She caught me watching and smiled. "I keep thinking if I open it again, it'll feel real." "It is real," I said. I took out my mother's locket, holding it for a moment before tucking it back in my pocket. The next morning, an email arrived from Madison's parents, a multi-page PDF with suggestions for the engagement party, guest lists, menus, dress code, music, even sample invitations. My breath caught as I scrolled, feeling the edges of my happiness curl in, crowded by expectations I hadn't agreed to. Madison, reading over my shoulder, squeezed my arm. "It's just how they are," she whispered. But I felt the first tremor of doubt, a subtle slipping of control. Still, when I looked at her across the breakfast table, sunlight catching the diamond on her finger, I wanted to believe this was just the next adventure, ours to shape, if we were brave enough to try. "We want this to be perfect," Linda declared, voice ringing through the Clark family kitchen like a challenge, for Madison, and for our family's reputation. She smiled at me with tight-lipped determination, tapping the edge of her iPad. All around us, open laptops and color-coded binders transformed the marble counter into a command center of Pinterest boards, fabric swatches, and urgent to-do lists. Madison sat at the table, rubbing her temples, phone buzzing every few minutes with a new question from her mother or a wedding planner she'd never actually met. I perched next to her, uncertain where to put my hands or my hope. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and stress. If I closed my eyes, I could almost hear my mother's gentle voice, "People matter more than appearances, Ethan." She'd said it 100 times, after school concerts, backyard birthdays, the Christmas when the turkey fell on the floor and we all laughed until we cried. But here, in the Clark household, it was the appearance of perfection that seemed to matter most. We'd been at this for hours. Robert had strong opinions about the caterer: no tofu, no fusion, nothing too weird, keep it classic, while Linda had drawn up a guest list so long we'd need a ballroom, not the cozy ceremony I pictured. Madison tried to mediate, but more often she simply nodded, agreeing to details I knew she didn't love. Every suggestion I made, a playlist, a smaller venue, more friends than business contacts, was met with polite resistance or, worse, a brisk dismissal. "Just think of how beautiful it'll look in the photos," Linda assured me, shifting another dish onto the menu spreadsheet. "And don't worry, Ethan, I'll make sure your father has a seat near the front." Madison's phone lit up again, another anxious text from her, wondering if we could sneak away for just a weekend, just the two of us. "Rain check?" I typed back, but she only replied with a sad emoji. At the next planning meeting, I mustered my courage. I'd like to include a tribute to my mom during the ceremony. Just a few words, or maybe a favorite song she loved. She Linda cut in before I finished, waving her hand. "Oh, Ethan, I know you mean well, but don't you think that's a bit somber? Weddings are about beginnings, not endings." She smiled brightly, like she'd just solved a difficult puzzle. "We don't want anyone leaving in tears, right?" I looked at Madison, searching her eyes for support. She hesitated, glancing down at her notes. "Maybe we can find another way," she said softly. "I just want everyone to be happy." Robert changed the subject to signature cocktails. The planner wanted to talk about floral centerpieces. I felt invisible, like a guest at my own life. Later that night, at home, I called Tracy. She answered on the second ring, her voice strong and steady. "You can't let them erase Mom, Ethan. This is your day, too." I paced the apartment, the city lights flickering beyond the rain-streaked window. "I just don't want to make things harder for Madison," I admitted. Tracy's tone softened. "I know you love her. But you don't have to disappear to make it work. Mom would want you to stand up for yourself, and for her." Her words echoed as I opened my laptop and pulled up the wedding script. I stared at the lines I'd written about my mother, the little joke about her famous carrot cake, the memory of her singing at parties, the quote she loved about love being patient. My finger hovered over the delete key, and for a moment, I erased them all. The document looked neater, emptier, but I felt the loss keenly. Quietly, I restored them in a private file, tucking her memory away where no one could reach it but me. The pressure mounted with each day. Madison apologized in quick, worried bursts, texting me lists, screenshots, updates, always ending with, "We'll get through this." I tried to believe her, but the gap between us and her parents seemed to widen, not close. Sometimes we argued, never for long, always smoothing things over before bed, but the strain lingered. We cooked dinner together, trying to recreate old routines, but even the kitchen felt staged now, like we were actors in someone else's production. One evening, in the midst of a particularly tense planning call, Linda snapped, "This isn't about your mother, Ethan. It's about Madison's big day." Her words hung in the air, sharp and final. I stared at Madison, waiting for her to defend me, to say that a wedding was about two people, not just her, not just her parents. But she only looked away, shoulders sagging with exhaustion. That night, after everyone had left and the house was silent, I sat alone at my desk, my mother's locket cool in my palm. I turned it over and over, wishing she were here to tell me what to do, to remind me who I was beneath all these expectations. Who was being honored at this wedding, me, Madison, or just her parents? Outside, the city's lights shimmered in the spring rain. I listened to their faint hum and wondered if somewhere, my mom was watching, urging me to be brave, to remember what mattered most. I clung to the thought, even as the world around me spun with plans and promises I wasn't sure were mine. I used to believe love could survive anything, distance, disappointment, even the passage of time, until I realized it was never just about love. There were days, in that quickening Portland summer, when I could almost convince myself things were still fine, still bright and possible. But more often, the light found its way in through cracks I hadn't noticed before. As the wedding drew closer, my world narrowed. Every group chat pinged with rehearsal dinner updates and last-minute suggestions. I watched the city in bloom, peonies and wild roses exploding in neighborhood gardens, while my own life felt stripped bare, like I was living inside someone else's story. The rehearsal dinner guest list became the breaking point. Madison and I sat hunched over our laptops one night, trying to finalize names. I wanted to invite a few old friends, people who'd seen me through the worst of things, but Linda insisted on balancing the list with business acquaintances and distant cousins. Madison was tense, picking at her thumbnail. I felt my patience thinning, the room closing in. Why does it matter so much who's there? Madison pleaded, her voice tired. It's just dinner. It matters to me, I said quietly. I want people who know me, who knew Mom. She sighed, rubbing her eyes. Ethan, we can't make everyone happy. The fight grew from there, little things surfacing, old frustrations bubbling up. Robert chimed in via group text, joking that we were upgrading the family tree. Linda sent a string of laughing emojis, but I just stared at my screen, hands shaking. Tracy's words echoed in my head, don't disappear in your own story. I withdrew, without really meaning to. I stopped answering group texts, started skipping some of the planning calls. I spent more time with Tracy and Eric, letting their familiar voices and old jokes anchor me. Tracy came over one Saturday, arms full of groceries, and we cooked one of Mom's old recipes, her baked macaroni with breadcrumbs and sweet onions. The kitchen filled with that scent, and for a while, it felt like home again. We talked about everything and nothing, memories of childhood, the weirdness of adulthood, her stubborn belief that I deserved to be happy. Tracy set a plate in front of me and touched my arm. Promise me you won't let them erase you, Ethan. Or her. Eric texted occasionally, sending memes and reminders that he'd have my back if you need a getaway driver. I smiled more than I expected. Sometimes, after Tracy left, I'd take long walks under the streetlights, the city humming around me, my mind running circles around questions I couldn't answer. At home, Madison tried to apologize. She cooked my favorite dinner, played our playlist, bought peonies for the kitchen table. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "We're almost there. It's just stress. We'll laugh about this someday." But it felt like she was smoothing the surface instead of seeing what ran underneath. Late one night, I sat at my desk, my wedding suit still in its plastic cover hanging by the closet. I opened my vows document, cursor blinking, blank spaces where my voice should be. I wrote a line about my mother. Patricia taught me that love is patient, and I carry her spirit with me into every new beginning. I read it over and over. The next morning, I showed the vows to Madison. She skimmed them, then hesitated. It's beautiful, Ethan. But, maybe it's too much about her? Maybe we keep it simple, just us. Her words stung, though I tried not to let it show. That afternoon, I deleted the line, watched the cursor blink in empty space, and wondered who I was becoming, what pieces I was losing just to keep moving forward. Tracy called. I told her I'd cut the line about Mom. You don't have to erase her to belong, you know, she said softly. You can make room for both. But I didn't know how. Not really. Instead, I tried to fill the silence. I signed up for a local art class, just to get out of the house, I told myself. I bought new pencils, found a seat at the back, and let my hands remember how to create something from nothing. It wasn't much, but it was mine. At night, I listened to old playlists, letting the music carry me back to summers that felt lighter. Sometimes I'd wander the apartment, staring at my unopened wedding suit, wondering if I'd recognize the man who'd wear it. Other nights, I'd wake from anxious dreams and reach for my mother's locket, tracing its edges until I could breathe again. The city felt so alive, windows lit, gardens wild, strangers laughing outside cafes. But inside, the air was thick with expectation, every corner filled with someone else's hope for who I should be. The rehearsal dinner was a week away. Madison slept beside me, her hand draped across my chest, steady and warm. I watched the ceiling and wondered, am I marrying Madison, or the whole Clark family? Was I building a future, or just learning how to disappear? Outside, a summer breeze rattled the blinds, hinting at change. I pressed my mother's locket to my heart, wishing for courage, for clarity, for a way forward that felt true. I thought nothing else could surprise me, until the night everything changed. That morning, Tracy had met me for breakfast at our favorite old-school diner. She slid into the booth, nudged a mug of coffee my way, and grinned. "Big night. Don't let them get under your skin, little brother." She said it like a joke, but the look in her eyes told me she knew how much I dreaded what was coming. By evening, Portland's sky had stretched into a streaky watercolor of clouds, sunset draping the Willamette River in gold. The restaurant chosen by the Clarks was perched above the water, private room, white linen tablecloths, carefully arranged centerpieces of pale roses and eucalyptus. Waiters circled with trays of canapés and glasses of champagne. From the moment we walked in, I felt the difference, every face, every laugh, every topic circling around the Clark family orbit. Eric clapped me on the back and tried to steady my nerves. "You got this," he whispered. But looking around, I felt strangely outnumbered, my dad, Tracy, a couple of my old college friends, and me against the Clark clan and their endless stream of well-dressed cousins, aunts, and business acquaintances. Even the room itself felt foreign, the views, the music, the careful hush. I felt like a guest at my own celebration. Dinner began with small talk, but the slide started early, little things that might pass unnoticed if you weren't on the lookout. Robert made a show of greeting my friends with booming jokes about new additions to the family tree. Linda offered polite, insincere compliments about Tracy's dress and asked Eric if he'd ever considered upgrading to a real job. Even Madison seemed tense, her smile too bright, her laugh a little too high-pitched. The food was beautiful: roasted salmon, braised short ribs, asparagus, tiny potatoes sculpted into perfect ovals. Plates were artful, but as the evening wore on, more and more food went untouched. Forks clinked against porcelain, but the conversation grew thinner. As the sun dipped behind the hills, glasses were raised for toasts. Robert went first, clearing his throat theatrically, his gaze sweeping the room. "Tonight is about family, about our Madison and, of course, Ethan." He winked in my direction, as if the joke were only for me. "We always hoped our girl would find someone who could keep up with her. I suppose we can say she's traded up." The laughter was louder on the Clark side. At our table, my friends and family shifted, silent. Linda took her turn, standing gracefully with a practiced smile. "What a wonderful thing, to join two families," she began, then glanced at me. "I remember when Madison brought Ethan home, so earnest, so devoted." She paused, letting the room lean in. "And of course, there's the generosity he learned from his late mother, Patricia. If only we all had such enthusiasm for helping." The edge in her voice made my chest tighten. "It takes a certain type to involve themselves so fully, doesn't it?" A few nervous laughs trickled out, but mostly, the room fell silent. Madison sat beside me, hand gripping mine under the table. She smiled, but her eyes darted, and she missed the way my jaw clenched. She let out a brittle laugh, echoing her parents', then gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, as if to say, "Just play along." But for the first time, I pulled my hand away, folding it in my lap. The chill between us was immediate. Tracy stood to speak next, lifting her glass with a tremor I almost missed. "To Madison and Ethan, may their kindness be their strength, and may they build a life where both families are honored." Her voice was steady, but Linda couldn't resist. She interrupted, laughing, "Oh, Tracy, always the peacemaker. Don't worry, we'll keep everyone in line tonight." The joke lingered, another ripple in the growing discomfort. I scanned the room. Eric caught my eye, shook his head gently. My father glanced away, his mouth a tight line. Even the waiters seemed to move more quietly, sensing the mood. Dessert was served, but hardly anyone ate. Wine glasses were refilled with unnecessary enthusiasm, conversation retreating to the safe havens of sports and weather. Every now and then, Robert made another jab about how lucky I was. Linda chimed in with a story about how family comes first, but you can't pick your in-laws, and each time, I felt smaller, more isolated. Then, the tribute began. Robert stood, glass raised, and Linda joined him, her arm looped through his. Before we finish, we'd like to honor someone who isn't with us tonight, but who certainly made her mark, Patricia Parker, Robert announced. She always had a way of getting involved, some might call it meddling, he joked, glancing at Linda for approval. But hey, her heart was in the right place. Linda leaned in, adding, she never missed an opportunity to share her thoughts on parenting, recipes, finances. Some people are just unforgettable, aren't they? She smiled, waiting for the room to laugh. No one did. I felt the blood rise in my face, my hands trembling in my lap. The world shrank to the white linen tablecloth, the glint of the silverware, the hush that followed. I looked at Madison, willing her to see, to say something, but she only bit her lip and stared at her plate. Tracy's eyes burned across the table, her hand curled into a fist. My friends exchanged glances, uncertainty passing between them. And suddenly, I couldn't stay quiet any longer. My chair scraped loudly as I stood. The room went silent, all eyes turning to me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might drown out my words. That's enough, I said, my voice shaking, but louder than I'd intended. You don't get to talk about my mother that way. Forks stopped midair. Even the clink of glasses ceased. Robert's eyes widened, Linda's mouth fell open in surprise. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Madison reached for my hand under the table, but I was already out of reach, my anger finally breaking through the surface. Every emotion I'd bottled up over the past months, hurt, frustration, longing, grief, rose to the top, undeniable and raw. The city lights flickered in the windows, reflected on faces suddenly unsure, and I knew, in that instant, that everything had shifted. The air was heavy with the unsaid, with the finality of speaking truth out loud. I was no longer willing to shrink myself, not for them, not for anyone. Some moments split your life in two, before and after. This was mine. For a long second, nobody in the restaurant moved. The rain streaked down the tall windows, blurring the city lights, filling the silence I'd created with a soft, persistent hush. My hands shook at my sides. I could feel Tracy's gaze burning steady and proud, Madison's hand frozen mid-reach, Robert's jaw clenched in surprise, Linda's lips parted, still half smiling as if she hadn't yet understood that the room had shifted. If you don't stand up for yourself, no one will. My mother's voice was so clear in my mind it was as if she was standing right beside me, a comforting presence in the storm. I drew a shaky breath, words tumbling out. You talk about my mother like she was a nuisance. Like her kindness was something to laugh at, something to mock. But let me remind you, she saved your restaurant when no one else would. She gave you a second chance, believed in you, lent you money, her time, her faith. She helped when your son needed tuition, when the oven broke, when you needed anything. She did it all without ever asking for anything back. Robert rolled his eyes, already trying to brush it away. Let's not make a scene, Ethan. It was a joke. We appreciate Patricia, but... No, I cut him off, my voice shaking but steady. It wasn't a joke. It was disrespect. And you keep doing it, over and over, like it doesn't matter. But it matters to me. She mattered to me. And if you can't see how cruel you're being, I shook my head, the words threatening to break. Then maybe you never understood what she really stood for. Linda tried to laugh, dabbing the corner of her eye with a napkin. Ethan, honey, you're too sensitive. Patricia was just involved, that's all. Let's move on. Tonight is about family, about new beginnings. Tracy stood then, fierce and unyielding. Don't you dare rewrite history, she said, her voice sharp as glass. My mother did more for you than your own pride will ever admit. I watched her work herself sick to keep your business afloat, to help Madison and Ryan, to make sure none of you ever had to ask. And you repay her with jokes? You diminish her because it's easier than saying thank you? George, silent as ever, rose and put a steadying hand on my shoulder. Around the room, guests shifted, some turning away, others murmuring quietly. I caught sympathetic looks, an aunt, maybe, and one of Madison's cousins who'd always been polite to me, embarrassed for the Clarks, not for me. My own friends looked stunned but relieved, as if they'd been holding their breath for me. Madison's face was blotchy, red and pale at once. Ethan, please, she whispered, voice thick with tears, just sit down. Let's talk outside. Not here, not now. But the truth was finally out, and I couldn't put it back. My whole body trembled with adrenaline and grief. I can't marry into a family that treats people this way, I said, louder than I meant to. I won't do it. I won't spend my life biting my tongue and pretending that's love. You can keep your jokes and your pride, but you can't have me. I turned and walked out. Tracy and George were already by my side, their presence both shield and anchor as the doors swung shut behind us. I didn't look back. The cool air slapped my face as we stepped into the rain, the sky a shimmering gray, streetlights streaked into halos. I stood there, head bowed, letting the rain soak through my suit, mixing cold relief with heartbreak so sharp it felt like a physical wound. For a moment, the city spun, voices from inside muffled by the glass, the heaviness in my chest slowly lifting, making way for something that felt almost like freedom. Tracy wrapped her arm around my shoulders, pulling me close, her own breath shuddering. You did it, she whispered. You stood up for her. For you. George nodded, silent but solid, his presence enough. I tried to catch my breath, hands still shaking, my mother's locket clutched so tightly in my palm I could feel its imprint against my skin. All the grief and anger I'd swallowed over the last year came pouring out, tears I couldn't stop, laughter that sounded almost hysterical, relief that left me trembling. The restaurant doors burst open behind us. Madison's voice, raw and desperate, called my name, Ethan. Please, wait. Her heels clicked against the pavement, echoing off the wet street. But I couldn't turn. Not yet. In my mind, my mother's voice was calm, sure, you did the right thing. I let that steady me, the knowledge that for once, I hadn't disappeared, hadn't let myself be erased. I watched the raindrops streak down the glass, washing away the careful script of a life I'd tried too hard to fit into. Somewhere behind me, the laughter and music resumed, the world moving on, but I felt the split, the clean break between who I'd been and who I could become. Tracy squeezed my arm. Let's go home, she murmured. We'll figure the rest out together. I nodded, taking a long, shaky breath. As we walked away, I could still hear Madison's voice, pleading, but all I could hold on to was the sense, painful, liberating, that I'd finally chosen myself. Don't do anything rash, Dad said, his voice low and steady as he handed me a mug of coffee in his familiar kitchen. But don't lose yourself either. The clock on the stove read 1:34 a.m. The house was still, the rain tapping at the windows in a soft, persistent rhythm. I pulled George's old flannel blanket tighter around my shoulders, soaking in the warmth and the smell of home, roasted coffee, wet earth, a faint trace of lemon from the dish soap. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, a dozen unread messages from Madison glowing in the dim light. My mind spun with everything that had happened, the sharp words, the shocked faces, the way I'd finally said what I'd been holding inside. I felt lighter, yes, but emptier too. I remembered deleting the vow about my mother, the regret settling deep in my chest. Was this what standing up for yourself felt like, liberation mixed with a terrible kind of loneliness? George sat across from me, hands folded, waiting quietly. He never rushed me. The kitchen walls were lined with old family photos, holidays, summer camping trips, blurry snapshots of Mom grinning beside me and Tracy, arms thrown around our shoulders. They watched over us now, silent witnesses to the mess I'd made and the man I was trying to become. "I'm sorry," I finally whispered. "I just snapped." George shook his head, a gentle smile breaking the stern lines of his face. "You did what you needed to do. Patricia would have been proud, Ethan." "I know I am." I blinked back tears, the relief almost too much to bear. For a moment, I let myself believe it, maybe I hadn't ruined everything. Maybe I was just finally telling the truth. My phone buzzed again. Madison. Another text, another apology, another plea to talk this through. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't mean to laugh, didn't mean to let things get so far, didn't mean to hurt me. Her words blurred together, urgent but lost against the static of my own anger. Tracy called around too, her voice tired but fierce. "You okay?" I managed a laugh. "I think so. We're still a family, no matter what happens next. You don't have to figure it all out tonight." "I know," I said, but the words felt far away. I wanted to ask her how she did it, how she'd learned to speak her truth without apology. But I let her go, promising to call her in the morning. Eric texted just before 3, "Want me to come over?" "I'll bring donuts." I smiled, shaking my head. "Not tonight, man." "Thanks." The house was quiet again. I stared at my mother's locket, turning it over and over in my palm, wishing she could tell me what to do next. The ache for her advice was sharper than ever, as if only she could untangle the knot in my chest. I pressed the locket to my heart, closed my eyes, and tried to listen for her voice. All I could hear was rain. For a while, I drifted, wrapped in the comfort of George's blanket, the kitchen lamp casting a gentle pool of light, the old refrigerator humming in the background. I replayed the night over and over, the moment I stood up, the words I couldn't take back, the way Madison's voice had broken as she called after me. I missed her, even as I felt betrayed by her silence. I opened my phone and scrolled through Madison's messages one more time. She was hurting too, I could see that. I thought about all the moments we'd shared, the laughter, the movie nights, the lazy Sundays. Could we ever find our way back to that? Or was the damage too deep? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make sense of what I was feeling. Instead, I typed and deleted a dozen different messages. Finally, I just wrote what was true: "We need to talk. This isn't about the wedding, it's about us." I stared at the screen, heart pounding, exhaustion making my thoughts heavy and slow. Then I hit send, the message slipping into the quiet space between us. I didn't know if I wanted reconciliation or closure. Maybe I wanted both. Maybe I just needed Madison to see me, not the son-in-law, not the peacekeeper, but the person I really was. I leaned back in my chair, the rain louder now, the sky just starting to lighten with dawn. Somewhere deep down, resolve began to form, not the fierce, angry kind, but something steadier, quieter. I knew that whatever happened next, I wouldn't go back to hiding or apologizing for who I was. I reached for the coffee, let the warmth ground me. I listened to the rain, the house, the gentle hum of a life that was still mine, even in pieces. And for the first time in a long while, I believed I could find my way forward, even if I had to build it from scratch. The rain was still falling when I heard the knock, a low, uncertain rhythm, barely audible over the sound of tires hissing on the street. I opened the door and there she was, Madison, soaked through, wisps of hair clinging to her cheeks, hands clutched around something I couldn't see. For a split second, I was back in our kitchen, music playing, her arms around my neck, both of us laughing as we spun and stumbled over the worn rug. Back then, I thought we were unbreakable, so close, so sure. But tonight, all I felt was the gap between us, grown wide and cold. "Hey," she said, her voice small. I stepped aside, let her in. The apartment felt half empty, boxes stacked by the door, a cold cup of coffee forgotten on the table, photos from better days tucked into the seams of packing tape. Madison hesitated in the entryway, shivering a little. Her hands tightened around the thing she'd brought, and finally, she held it out to me, the photo of the three of us, me, Madison, and my mom, taken this summer before Mom got sick. We were all squinting into the sun, arms tangled, happy in a way that now felt impossibly distant. "I thought you should have this," Madison said, her voice trembling. I took it, careful not to let my hands shake. "Thank you." For a while, we just stood there, the silence stretching between us. Madison wiped her eyes, makeup smudged by the rain and tears. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said at last. "For everything. For not standing up for you. For letting them, my parents, treat you that way. I'll talk to them, I swear. I'll make them understand. But I can't promise they'll change." I nodded, setting the photo on the table. "I know." I tried to smile, but it felt wrong, thin. "Would you have ever stood up for me, Maddie? Really? If it meant losing them?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down at her shoes, at the puddle of water growing on the doormat. "I want to say yes," she whispered. "But I don't know." I kept thinking if I kept the peace, eventually things would get better. I thought loving you would be enough. I felt something inside me give, like the snap of a thread pulled too tight for too long. "Sometimes love isn't enough," I said softly. "Not when you have to disappear to make it work." Madison pressed her palms to her eyes, shoulders shaking. "I did love you, Ethan. I still do. But I can't lose them. I wish I was braver. I wish I was more like you." We talked for a long time, honest, aching words. We picked over the bones of what had been, neither of us quite able to let go, both knowing we couldn't go back. She told me she'd miss Sunday mornings, our rainy walks, the way I always remembered to buy her favorite cereal. I told her I'd miss her laugh, her playlists, the way she brought color to every room. She looked around the apartment, at the stacks of boxes, the old sofa, the mug she always used still sitting by the sink. "I left my mug," she said quietly. I nodded. "You can take it, if you want." She shook her head. "No. It's yours now." There was nothing left to say, and yet I wished for one more moment, a way to pause time, to hold on before it all slipped away. Madison reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She set it on the bookshelf, next to the art class flyer I'd picked up the week before but never called about. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I did love you." Her voice broke on the last word. She stepped to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. The rain spattered harder against the window, wind rattling the glass. "Take care of yourself, Ethan," she said. "You too, Maddie." She smiled, a real one, just for a second, then slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. I waited, listening to her footsteps fade on the stairs, the silence pressing in. The apartment was empty except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and the hush of rain. I sat at the table, the old photo in my hand, Madison's mug on the counter, her note on the bookshelf. I didn't open it, not yet. I traced the faces in the photo, my mother's arm around both of us, sunlight caught in her hair. Grief and relief crashed together inside me, loss and something like hope, faint but present. I looked over at the art class flyer, edges curling, my name already penciled in at the top. Maybe I'd sign up after all. The rain kept falling, washing the city clean. I sat there a long time, letting the silence settle, letting myself believe, just a little, that endings could hold beginnings, too. The quiet after Madison left was somehow both empty and full. The apartment echoed in strange ways, floorboards creaking at night, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant shush of the Max train rolling past at dawn. I kept expecting to find her mug in the sink, her laughter in the kitchen, her playlist drifting in from the bathroom. Instead, I found only silence and a slowly growing sense that maybe, just maybe, this was what healing could sound like. Mom used to say, peace is hard won, but worth fighting for. I'd always brushed that off as one of her many gentle, impossible truths. But now I understood, peace wasn't something that arrived, gift-wrapped. It was something you clawed your way toward, one painful step at a time. I boxed up the wedding remnants, the guest list drafts, the RSVP cards, the photo strips from our engagement party. I dropped Madison's mug and a stack of old greeting cards at Goodwill, feeling oddly weightless on the walk back. The playlist we'd made together for Sunday mornings, the ones with her voice layered over mine in a silly duet, I deleted without listening. That hurt most of all. But I did it anyway. Tracy came over the next weekend, arms full of groceries. She moved around my kitchen like she owned the place, chopping onions and humming, digging through drawers for the old Dutch oven Mom had passed down to me. She made our mother's favorite soup, chicken and wild rice with dill and carrots. The smell filled the apartment, wrapping around me in a way I'd almost forgotten. We ate at the kitchen table, steam fogging the windows. Tracy told a story about Mom mixing up sugar and salt in a pie recipe one Thanksgiving and the look of pure horror on George's face when he took the first bite. We both laughed until our sides hurt, until tears ran down my cheeks for reasons that had nothing to do with loss. After dinner, Tracy squeezed my hand. You're doing okay, you know? More than okay. I see you coming back to yourself. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe Mom would be proud. Later, I drove out to the little cemetery outside Portland, the one where wildflowers crept across the grass and the trees shaded the stones. I brought the locket, cool in my palm, and sat by Mom's grave. I talked to her, really talked, telling her about the mess I'd made, the love I'd lost, the ways I was trying to find my way forward. I'm letting go, Mom, I said, pressing the locket into the earth at the foot of her marker. Not of you, but of the need to hold on so tight. I think you'd want that. The wind rustled the leaves overhead. For the first time, I felt a rush of peace, not the fleeting kind, but the deep, quiet kind that came from finally putting something down. Eric called that night, upbeat as always. Dude, rec soccer's starting again, our team needs someone who's not afraid of getting grass stains. Or, hey, you ever think about helping at the shelter with me? He paused, then said, seriously, Ethan. You've got more to give than you know. I laughed, surprised by how easy it was. Let me think about it. I signed up for the art class the next morning. My hand shook as I filled out the form, but I did it anyway. First class was next week. I spent the afternoon with a new sketchbook, the paper blank and full of possibility. I drew clumsy lines, half-formed ideas, letting myself enjoy the act of making something just for me. In small ways, life started again. I cooked more, tried new recipes, burned a few. I let Tracy drag me to a trivia night, where we lost but laughed the whole way home. George and I started a Friday night movie routine, old westerns, new comedies, anything but romance for a while. The apartment felt different. Not empty, just open. I began to see the space as my own, not the backdrop of a story that had ended, but the first page of something I was writing by myself. I visited Mom's grave one last time before the season turned. The sun was warm on my back as I left fresh flowers and whispered a quiet thank you. Driving home, windows down, I let the air fill my lungs, the city unfolding before me. I didn't know what came next. Maybe new friendships, maybe mistakes, maybe something unexpected. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of starting over. A crisp breeze swept down from the hills, tumbling gold leaves along the sidewalk as I walked toward the river. Portland in early fall always felt a little like a homecoming, soft gray sky, sunlight glinting off the water, sweaters pulled from the back of the closet. The city was quietly alive, brimming with possibility, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my toes. That morning, Tracy and I met for brunch at our favorite cafe. She was already at a window seat when I arrived, mug in hand, a mischievous glint in her eye. She slid a small box across the table to me, wrapped in a faded blue ribbon I recognized from our mother's sewing drawer. "You'll know when to pass it on," she said. Inside was the locket I'd left at the cemetery, a little tarnished, a little battered, but still holding all the love and memory it always had. "It belongs with you. For now, anyway." We talked and laughed over pancakes and too much coffee, sharing stories and gentle ribbing. I told Tracy about the art class, the terrible sketches, the mess I'd made with charcoal, the teacher's patience, the way it felt to do something new just for myself. She squeezed my hand. "You're braver than you think, Ethan. Mom would be proud." I smiled, really smiled, and meant it. After brunch, I wandered through the farmer's market, the air thick with the scent of apples and cinnamon and earth. That's where I saw Madison. She was by a honey stand, hair pulled back, sweater sleeves pushed up, laughing at something a vendor said. For a moment, my heart squeezed, memories crashing in, 100 small moments, 1,000 hopes. She looked up, caught my gaze, and for a breathless second, we just stood there, two people with a shared past, no longer tangled together. I nodded, she nodded back. No bitterness, no words, just a quiet acceptance. It still hurt, but the pain was clean, edged with something like gratitude. We'd loved, we'd lost, and we'd let each other go. I bought a bouquet of sunflowers and walked home. My apartment was a little messy now, half-finished sketches on the table, the soft smudge of charcoal on my fingers, a new mug Tracy had given me, for new beginnings, she'd said. I set the flowers in a vase, let sunlight flood the living room, and sat down to sketch for class. The lines came easier now, less hesitant, more sure. I even laughed out loud at a joke from one of my classmates, a woman named Mel who teased me about my abstract trees. Later, Eric texted, "Road trip next weekend?" Just us, the open highway, and the best roadside diners on the West Coast. I grinned and typed back, "Count me in," something I'd never have said before. It felt good to say yes to life, to risk something, even if it was just a weekend out of town. As the day faded, I took the long way home, strolling along the river where Madison and I had once dreamed up a future. The water was silver and restless, reflecting city lights and cloud shapes. I stopped at our old bench and sat for a while, letting memory wash through me, her hand in mine, promises whispered over coffee, the way I used to believe in forever. But forever was just a story we told ourselves. Letting go, I realized, was the real gift. It was what my mother had been trying to teach me all along, not to clutch the past until it hurt, but to honor it and carry it forward, lighter and freer. The locket felt cool in my palm, not heavy anymore, just right. Dusk gathered, painting everything in soft purples and golds. I headed home, shoulders straight, steps easy, feeling, finally, like myself again. Not the self I'd been before Madison, or during, but the self I was still becoming, open, imperfect, ready for what came next. In the kitchen, I made a fresh cup of coffee, poured it into my new mug, and stood by the window. The city was alive out there, voices, music, the smell of rain on concrete. I lifted my mug in a quiet toast, to new chapters. Tomorrow would be art class again, and after that, maybe soccer with Eric's team, or a volunteer shift at the shelter. New faces, new stories. Maybe, someday, even new love. But tonight, I let myself settle into the silence, not empty now, but filled with hope. Happily ever after, I realized, was never the point. Happily moving forward, that was enough. Sometimes, letting go is the kindest thing we can do for ourselves and the people we love. Looking back, I realize that healing isn't about forgetting or pretending the pain never happened, it's about honoring what mattered, carrying the lessons forward, and choosing hope when the road splits beneath our feet. In the end, love is less about holding tight and more about knowing when to release, so something new can grow. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your reflections or experiences. Feel free to share your thoughts below, or simply pass along a bit of kindness today. Sometimes, that's the most meaningful legacy we can leave.